The worst possible survival strategy for an animal on the African savanna is to stand up on two legs and walk slowly through the grass. If you were a biological engineer tasked with designing a creature that would go extinct within 48 hours, you would design a human. We are, by every objective metric of the Pliocene and Pleistocene eras, a catastrophic failure of defensive design. We lack the armor of the tortoise, the blinding speed of the cheetah, the crushing jaws of the hyena, or the arboreal agility of our more primitive primate cousins. We are essentially slow-moving, soft-skinned vertical tubes of protein walking through a landscape populated by some of the most efficient killing machines to ever grace the planet. Yet we are the ones who remained while the titans fell. Here is a mystery that took evolutionary biologists and paleoanthropologists nearly a century to crack. How did a creature that was essentially born to be eaten manage to flip the script on its predators? To solve this case, we have to look at the crime scenes, which in this instance are the fossilized remains of our ancestors. For a long time, there was a comforting myth that early humans were the masters of their domain, rugged hunters who kept the wolves at bay with primitive grit. But the forensic evidence tells a very different story. I should note, the reality is far more humbling than the movies suggest. When we look at the fossils of early hominids like Australopithecus africanus, we don't see the marks of a dominant predator. We see the punctures of fangs and the scraping of talons. One of the most famous pieces of evidence is the Tong child, a 2.5-million-year-old skull found in South Africa in 1924. For decades, researchers debated how this young individual died. It wasn't until 2006 that researcher Lee Berger and his team noticed specific markings in the eye sockets and on the cranium that perfectly matched the damage caused by modern crowned eagles when they prey on monkeys. We weren't the kings of the plains. We were being plucked off the ground like field mice by birds of prey. This brings us to our first clue in the mystery. The man-the-hunter myth was actually a false lead. For the vast majority of our history, we were the hunted. According to research by Donna Hart and Robert Sussman in their book Man the Hunted, early humans were likely the target of predators in about 6% to 10% of their population. To put that in perspective, that is a higher predation rate than many species of deer or wild boar today. If we were being hunted so effectively, the mystery isn't why we survived, but why we didn't vanish into the fossil record as a failed experiment. I'll admit, looking at the sheer number of predator species active at the time, it's a miracle the first chapter of human history wasn't also the last. If we weren't faster or stronger, perhaps our survival relied on a different kind of armor. Let's look at the social shield clue. Humans are obsessed with groups, and while we often think of this as a psychological trait, it began as a desperate defensive tactic. In biology, there is a concept called the dilution effect. If you are a lone Australopithecus walking to a waterhole, a Dinophilis, a terrifying false saber-toothed cat that specifically targeted primates, has a 100% chance of picking you if it decides to strike. But if you are in a group of 50, your individual risk drops to 2%. This isn't just a mathematical theory, it's a life-saving reality. However, the mystery deepens because being in a group also makes you louder and easier to track. A group of 50 primates is a dinner bell for a pack of giant hyenas like Pachyrhinacuta, which weighed as much as a modern lion and had jaws capable of crushing the femur of an elephant. The social shield only works if the group can do more than just stand there and wait to be picked off. This leads us to our next clue, the discovery of coordinated mobbing. Modern observations of chimpanzees have shown that when a leopard attacks, the chimps don't always scatter. Sometimes they scream, throw sticks, and charge the predator as a single chaotic unit. You might find it interesting that even the most hardened predator has a very specific risk-reward calculator in its brain. A predator survives by being healthy. If a leopard gets its eye poked out by a sharpened stick or its rib broken by a well-placed stone, it can't hunt. If it can't hunt, it starves. By making ourselves expensive to kill, we fundamentally changed the math for the predators. We became the one meal that might fight back, and in the wild, predators almost always prefer the easy meal over the dangerous one. But that still doesn't explain how we survived the night. This is where the mystery of the sleep paradox comes in. For an upright walking primate, the ground is a death trap after the sun goes down. Most of our ancestors' predators, like the meganterion, another species of saber-tooth, were nocturnal or crepuscular hunters with vision systems tuned for the dark. We, on the other hand, have the night vision of a potato. For millions of years, the answer was simple. We went back to the trees. Our anatomy actually reflects this struggle. I find it fascinating that our skeletons were essentially dual citizens for eons. Even as our ancestors developed the ability to walk on two legs, they retained long arms and curved finger bones, traits that were useless on the ground but essential for hauling oneself up a marula tree at dusk. Yet, as we moved further into the open savanna, the trees became sparse. We were forced into the next phase of the mystery, the underground alibi. Caves seem like a natural choice for defense, but forensic taphonomy, the study of how bones decay and are deposited, reveals a darker truth. At the Swartkrans cave site in South Africa, researcher Travis Pickering found something chilling. The cave wasn't a fortress for humans. It was a larder for leopards. The fossil record showed that leopards would drag hominids into the trees growing over the cave mouths, and the bones would eventually drop into the shafts below. Moving into a cave without a way to control the entrance was like walking into a giant stone trap. This means that until a specific X factor arrived, humans were never truly safe, even in the safest places. That X factor is our most significant clue yet, the controlled use of fire. It's worth mentioning that some researchers believe this was the single most important event in the history of life on Earth, and for good reason. The firewall didn't just provide warmth, it was the first piece of technology that allowed us to rewrite the rules of ecology. Evidence from sites like Chesawanja in Kenya suggests that hominids may have been interacting with fire as far back as 1.4 million years ago. While it took a long time for us to learn how to create it at will, even maintaining a natural fire from a lightning strike changed everything. Every predator on the planet has an ancestral, hardwired fear of fire. It is a sensory overload of heat, light, and smell that signals a threat that cannot be bitten or clawed. When humans brought fire to the mouth of a cave, the cave finally became a fortress. It allowed us to reclaim the night. But fire did something even more subtle and more powerful. It changed our bodies. By cooking food, we could extract more calories with less digestive effort. This fueled the growth of a massive, energy-hungry brain. It's a bit of a circular irony. The more we protected ourselves, the smarter we got, and the smarter we got, the more ways we found to protect ourselves. However, fire alone didn't turn us into the world's most dangerous animal. Fire is stationary. To truly conquer the predators, we had to find a way to kill them from a distance. This brings us to the smoking gun of our investigation, the invention of the projectile. For almost every other predator-prey relationship in nature, the contact zone is where the battle is decided. A lion has to touch a zebra to kill it. A shark has to bite a seal. This means the predator is always at risk of a retaliatory strike. But when humans started throwing rocks, and later spears, we became the only animal on Earth that could inflict lethal damage from outside the predator's strike zone. I should point out that even a relatively weak human can throw a stone with enough force to crack a skull from 20 feet away. The Schöningen spears, found in Germany and dating back 400,000 years, show that we weren't just sharpening sticks. We were engineering high-velocity weapons with the weight balanced toward the tip for aerodynamic stability. The projectile weapon didn't just allow us to hunt, it created a landscape of fear for the predators. Imagine you are a cave lion. For thousands of generations, your ancestors have viewed these hairless primates as easy snacks. But suddenly, when you get within 50 feet of them, you are struck by a flying piece of flint or a sharpened wooden shaft. You can't see the threat, you can't bite the threat, and you can't outrun the threat because it moves faster than you do. Over time, the predators that survived were the ones that learned to stay away from humans. We didn't just survive predators, we conditioned them to fear us. This was a psychological victory as much as a physical one. But there is one more clue that often gets overlooked in this investigation: our bizarre ability to sweat. I know it sounds mundane, but in the world of survival, it is a superpower. Most mammals have to pant to cool down. When a cheetah runs at full speed, its body temperature spikes so fast that it has to stop and rest for 20 minutes, or it will literally cook its own brain. Humans, however, are covered in millions of eccrine sweat glands. We are the masters of thermoregulation. This allowed our ancestors to engage in persistence hunting. We could find a predator in the heat of the noon sun, when the predator was most vulnerable and sluggish, and we could simply walk it to death. We would track it, flush it out, and keep it moving. The predator would eventually collapse from heat stroke, unable to pant fast enough to stay cool, while we just kept sweating and walking. We became the it from a horror movie, the slow, unstoppable force that never stops coming until you're too exhausted to fight back. As we assemble all these clues, the group dynamics, the fire, the projectiles, the thermoregulation, the verdict becomes clear. Our survival wasn't the result of a single brilliant invention. It was the result of a defense-in-depth strategy that slowly closed every loophole the predators used to exploit us. By 50,000 years ago, the case was essentially closed. The hunters had become the hunted. In fact, the arrival of modern humans in any new territory, be it Australia, the Americas, or Northern Europe, was almost always followed by a mass extinction of megafauna. The giant cats, the massive bears, and the crushing hyenas that had terrorized our ancestors for millions of years couldn't adapt to a prey animal that had turned the entire environment into a weapon. But as we look at the final piece of evidence, we have to ask ourselves, did we go too far? The mystery of how we survived is solved, but it has been replaced by a new mystery. Can we survive ourselves? We spent 2 million years looking over our shoulders, terrified of the dark, only to become the thing that the dark is now afraid of. We have cleared the forests, lit up the night with electricity, and pushed the descendants of our ancient tormentors into tiny pockets of protected land. The lions and leopards that once saw us as soft meat are now at our mercy. It's a strange feeling, isn't it? To realize that our entire civilization is essentially a very elaborate way of making sure we never get eaten again. The case of the human survival strategy is one of the most successful comeback stories in the history of the planet. We started as the Taung child, helpless in the talons of an eagle, and ended as the architects of the Anthropocene. We used language to build a database of predator behavior, fire to create a sanctuary, and endurance to outlast the very things that were built to destroy us. We are the only animal that took the fear of being eaten and turned it into the drive to conquer the stars. But even as we sit in our locked houses, behind our reinforced doors and under our streetlights, a small part of our brain, the ancient primal part, is still listening for the snap of a twig in the grass. We haven't forgotten what it's like to be on the menu. That ancestral memory is what makes us so cautious, so prone to anxiety, and so obsessed with security. It is the ghost of the Pliocene, whispering to us that the contact zone is never as far away as we think. We might have won the war against the big cats and the giant bears, but we still carry the scars of that conflict in our DNA. Which makes me wonder, if we ran out of new mysteries to solve, would we start looking for monsters in the shadows again, just to feel that old, familiar spark of survival? Case closed, for now. We have identified the methods, the motives, and the tools that allowed a slow, hairless primate to inherit the Earth, but every solved mystery leads to another. Now that we've ensured our physical survival, we're left with a more complex question. What happens to a predator-turned-protector when there's nothing left to defend against but its own nature? We've built a world where the only thing left to fear is the person staring back at us in the mirror. If you want to keep digging into these evolutionary rabbit holes with me, hit that subscribe button. There are plenty more cold cases in our history just waiting to be reopened. Let's think about that for a second. We transformed from a snack into a god in the blink of an evolutionary eye. We are the survivors of a million-year-long gauntlet, the descendants of the few who were smart enough to stay in the group, fast enough to reach the tree, and brave enough to hold the torch. Every time you feel a surge of adrenaline when the lights go out, or your heart races at a sudden movement in your peripheral vision, you are experiencing a direct link to those ancestors. You are feeling the legacy of the landscape of fear. It's not a bug in your system, it's the very feature that kept you alive. Think back to that image we started with. that slow, upright primate walking through the tall grass. I want you to look at it one more time, but through a different lens. We used to see that posture as a vulnerability, a sign of a creature that didn't know how much danger it was in. But look closer. Look at the way the light hits the skin. Look at the focus in the eyes. That upright posture wasn't an invitation to a predator. It was a lookout tower. It was the first step toward a spear throw, the first movement of a persistence hunt, and the necessary position to carry a flaming branch. That primate wasn't a victim in waiting. It was a revolution in progress. It was a creature that had decided that the rules of biology no longer applied to it. It was the only animal on the savannah that could look a lion in the eye from 50 yards away and not feel like prey but like an observer. That is the true verdict of our investigation. We didn't just survive the predators. We transcended the very category of prey. We became a biological anomaly, a creature that exists outside the standard food chain, a predator of predators, a force of nature that the rest of the world is still trying to figure out how to live with. But don't get too comfortable. The next time you find yourself in the woods at twilight and the wind shifts and the shadows seem to stretch just a little too far, remember where you came from. Remember that your ancestors survived because they were never truly comfortable. They survived because they knew that in the wild, there is no such thing as safe. There is only safe for now. They handed you the torch, the spear, and the social shield. They gave you the sweating skin and the upright gait. And most importantly, they gave you the caution that kept them from becoming a footnote in a leopard's dinner. The investigation into our past is more than just a search for facts. It's a search for our own identity. We are the ones who didn't get eaten. We are the ones who kept the fire burning through the longest, coldest nights of the Pleistocene, and we are the ones who will continue to walk slowly and upright into whatever mystery comes next. Just keep an eye on the grass behind you, because the landscape of fear never truly goes away. It just changes shape. And honestly, isn't that what makes being human so exciting? We've covered the clues, we've analyzed the crime scenes, and we've reached a verdict. The mystery of our survival is a testament to our ingenuity, our cooperation, and our sheer stubborn refusal to stay at the bottom of the food chain. But as we move forward into an uncertain future, let's not forget the lessons of the past. Let's remember that our strength comes from our groups, our power comes from our knowledge, and our survival depends on our ability to see the threats before they see us. The world is still full of mysteries, and I'm ready to solve the next one with you. If you've got a theory about what we should investigate next, maybe the mystery of why we started building cities or the secret history of our relationship with dogs, drop it in the comments. I read them all, and your curiosity is what keeps this investigation going. So, as the sun sets on this particular case, take a moment to appreciate the journey. From the Tang Child to the International Space Station, it has been a long, dangerous, and utterly improbable walk. We have earned our place at the top, but we must never forget the price that was paid to get us here. The predators of the past are gone, but the spirit of the survivor remains. Keep your eyes open, keep your fire bright, and never stop asking how. Until next time, stay curious and stay upright. After all, the savannah is still out there, in one form or another, and you are still the most dangerous thing walking through it. Don't ever let the shadows tell you otherwise. But even as you walk with the confidence of a species that has conquered the globe, never forget that one singular physical detail that started this whole journey. Never forget the vulnerability that was actually your greatest strength. Because when you strip away the technology, the cities, and the clothes, you are still that same primate. You are still that same upright walker. And you are still carrying the most lethal weapon in the history of life, the ability to make the rest of the world afraid of you. In the end, we didn't survive by becoming more like the predators. We survived by becoming something they couldn't even imagine. We became the masters of the landscape of fear, and we did it while being the softest, slowest thing on the plains. It is a haunting thought, isn't it, that our entire existence is predicated on being the one animal that broke the world's oldest rules. We are the anomaly. We are the survivors, and we are just getting started. But as you go about your day, just remember that ancient, one-line direct statement that contradicts common sense. The worst possible survival strategy was actually the best one. We stood up, we walked into the open, and we dared the world to try and stop us. And so far, Nothing has. Just remember that the next time you feel a chill on the back of your neck. It's not just a draft. It's 2 million years of evolution telling you to pay attention. Because even for a god, a single exposed hairless Achilles tendon is still a very long way to fall. It is the one physical detail that connects you to the Taung child, a pulsing, vulnerable reminder that under all our layers of civilization, we are still made of meat and the dark is still very, very deep. That tendon is your history, your vulnerability, and your chilling, definitive closing argument. You survived because you were the only thing in the grass that knew exactly how much it had to lose.